Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Ah, well, what about that? I'm just showing you my house there behind me before I go back to
Oh
just
yes. Oh yeah. How did you do that?
I don't know. It's the
Years,
thing.
years of hard work and
I guarantee you it wasn't that. I was going to try to impress you with this picture of my boat here, but it's not. If I get out of the way,
yeah.
maybe you can see it. But I wouldn't want to work on that boat anyway. That's more. I guess you were never a fisherman. What were you? You did ski instruction, if I'm not mistaken, up there at Whistler. You
I
were.
know. I've never been to Whistler.
Oh, I thought you put time in. Did you ever put time in out here in Vancouver at all?
No, years ago, just before I settled down, I did get in touch with the people in Vancouver to see if there was any role for me there, because I lived up in Norway for a little while and I liked the skiing. So that's where it came
That
up in conversation.
something motivated me to say I've got to get John out here with his family to see Whistler. Um,
Yeah.
but
Well,
but then again, if you were in Norway, you'd look at them up there and you just kind of yawn and you'd go, yeah,
no, you see,
yeah.
I I have family in Switzerland, and when I skied in Norway, it was okay, but it's not very high, and there's not a lot of snow in Norway. They don't get a huge amounts of snow, or certainly not when I was there. The weather's nice and consistent, so it's consistently cold, but they don't get the masses of snow because it's so northern, uh, and so there's not a lot of moisture, which makes for really nice sunny days most of the time you're in the mountains, and all about sort of -10, -15, pretty normal during the day. But but you don't get big mountain skiing. You know, you could come down in about flat out. You'd get down the mountain in under a minute.
I would find it very enjoyable to have the Leddy family find a outing in up at Whistler. I think that would be a lot of fun. Have you been out our way to Vancouver Island at all, like
I have
Victoria?
never. I've never been in the northern hemisphere. I have never been. I've been to New York once for a few days in February, and
Really?
that's my whole North American experience.
Huh. Well, that's got to change. So we've got to figure this out. First, let's see if we can't get rid of this little weird looking round virus thing.
Yeah.
And then and then let's do something where we can enjoy life together. Um, how are you, and how is the wellness of your family? Everyone is healthy and everything.
They're all good. The children are bad tempered some of the time in the lockdown, but apart from that, bedtime is always a bit traumatic in our house. But yeah, they're good.
Your
Christine's
your your wife was to be watching some show, or is she going to an actual play?
no, it's I think it's Andrew Lloyd Webber's being very generous and putting his shows for limited periods of time
Yeah.
on YouTube, sort of classic performances of it. So
Oh,
she's watching a classic performance of Phantom of the Opera.
I do believe popcorn and a little holding of the hand would have been, nice and romantic there, but
No, no, no. Musicals are not my bag.
well, such is life. I wanted to back up a bit and talk a little bit about a couple things, but only because I'm eager to hear about it. I was chatting with Chris Myers,
Yeah.
and brought up a couple names, yours of which was one of them, and I was incredibly amazed at what seemed like a level of appreciation that went far deeper than just platonics. It was brought up there, almost as though there was quite a bit of time put into nurturing, a depth of relationship professionally, and he had mentioned that he said, I have a real affection for John, because he said the guy, without charging a dime, would let us come over to his house, only he said flat. He said, or he'd bring us over to the hospital that he would work in, and would just teach us. And the level of right now, especially as we're seeing in this pandemic, or Wildman's organization are doing this regular presentation, and there seems to be a jockeying for branding or whatever. It was one of those things where I saw such attributed knowledge to a willingness on your part to work on just plain helping these people learn what you knew. Tell me that story. How did that come about, and how did they reach out to you, and all that?
Well, I have always, I remember, how you look back and you're never quite sure why you ever did anything. But you kind of build up a story in your head. And so I'm not sure how much of it, what I remember now is fact or fiction. But
okay.
I remember starting off by seeing one of my patients being scanned in radiology and thinking, as a physio, and thinking, why the hell aren't we using this? And that was in about 2000. And just naively going to the radiology department and saying, can I borrow your scanner while you're not using it? and they...
You were not a sonographer at this time, is that right?
No, this was just
you were a physio.
A straight sort of straight physio, no seniority, no nothing, just went along and just asked, and they said no, understandably in hindsight. And I said, well, how do you get to use one? They said, you have to be a sonographer. And I looked into it and the rest of it, and there were so many bars to physios using it, and there were at the time in the UK probably 2 or 3 physios who did ultrasound at quite a low level.
Academic?
No. There were some academics, but they were doing the muscle, the Maria Stokes, Jackie Whittaker type things, and that the Hydes group sort of,
the RUSI, R-U-S-I.
Yes, that group.
Yeah,
but there were only a couple of very well established and successful private practitioners who had small ultrasound machines and were experimenting with it, I guess, or using it but in a quite limited way at the time. And I thought this was something that we should do. And I also thought that someone should do it by the book, to give a little bit of backbone to the organization, so someone could, because there were all sorts of people saying you shouldn't use it, and I thought someone has to be able to do it, say you should use it, and when other people criticized, be able to stand toe to toe with them.
Absolutely.
So I thought,
when you say by the book, I'm hearing you say from the foundation of the physics of what actually makes it tick, almost like from a foundation of training that gives you the... Yeah. No.
He is competent and is able and to know as much about it as the people who are criticizing.
Yeah. Okay.
Because at the time they were just saying, we are the experts, you shouldn't use it. So part of my point of going and just doing the whole of the ultrasound training was that. And so I went off and I found eventually some people who would train me. And
you went off to do sonography?
Yes.
While still working? I mean,
I couldn't do that. I didn't have any support from the physios organizations, obviously, as someone just deciding that this is what should be done, and against all the, people saying, should we do it? We can't do it, and the rest of it. So I had to quit my job and go and just do the studying, because it was at least minimum of 2 days a week you had to scan up. To get a place on an ultrasound course, you had to, in those days, have a hospital agree to train you at least 2 days a week. And then you had to go to college for 1 day a week for 18 months.
Wow. So this was a commitment where you at least 3 days a week, you 2 days a week you were spent in practical clinical training through the hospital. And then 1 day a week you took the didactic type stuff where you actually were book learning and you were with profs and taking, for a year and a half.
Yeah, and then there was studying as well. And because I'd had to travel quite a long way to find anyone who wanted to train me, it was quite a long journey out there.
Where were you living?
So
London area?
I started living in, at the time I was living close to London, not a million miles from where I am now, but and I got training on the South Coast. So by American standards, it wasn't huge, but I had to move there. And so I didn't find very much work. But anyway, the point of the story was that when I'd got out, was training, part of my reason for going and becoming a sonographer was I thought the physios should use it. And so once I was able to use it as well as anyone else seemed to be able to, well, at the time, there probably were a lot of people who were a lot better, but I couldn't see them. They weren't visible to me. And I'd been asked to do some teaching with one of the surgeons, I think, around about that time.
The shoulder surgeon.
Shoulder surgeon, yeah. I can't remember exactly, but then I thought, well, I should be running a course for physios. And so I'd met up and got together with a few people like Mark Maybury and Gordon Lumsden and Jane Dixon and another physio called Christine Mallion, who sadly died a few years later. So you won't have heard of her. And we'd started to run some weekend courses, a couple a year, for physios, 2-day courses.
Musculoskeletal, not pelvic floor, not abdominals, not. You were looking at shoulders, elbows, that kind of stuff.
Yes. So we were doing 2-day introductory courses to try to generate some interest in this. But obviously, people coming from all over the country, and only a very few of them, we had trouble filling the courses, getting people to come on them. That wasn't taking anyone to any sort of level. It was just like a taster. And so I thought we needed a course where we actually carried on teaching people, because there were no courses out there to do. You couldn't go and study it on a course like you do now. So I got together with one of the physios who was self-taught in London, but who was good, called Robert Louse, who's one of the partners.
I'm seeing a name. He shows up. He's partners in Smug, or is he partners in?
He's a partner in Smug.
All right.
So I got in touch with him, and I said, I want to run a program in central London. And as it happened, and around just a little bit before then, I'd been approached by the hospital where Chris Myers works at, and a few of the other people, by their management. They wanted to buy a machine, one of the really small machines, maybe do a little bit of transversus and something else with that, and do a 1-day introduction for them to show them sort of how to use it, things like that. And so I invited Mark Maybury and Robert Louse to come along and do that with me. And so, because Robert Louse was based in London, I then said, well, now for these guys and for anyone else who wants to do it, let's run a program once a month on I think it was a Tuesday evening course, I can't remember. And we called it like first Tuesday of the month or something. And we would get them around for a couple of hours, and we would teach them ultrasound.
How would that look? Would you be pulling up anatomy diagrams, and then you would do, or would you be talking beam width? Would you be talking how much physics was involved in this, or were you just saying?
It wasn't an academic course, because I thought you can study the academics, and you don't have to teach that much academics at the start. You need to get people to scan. And
explore.
So
adventure.
we would just practice, and I would just get people to practice, and then we would talk about it. And Robert, what I tried to do was to split it up, good cop, bad cop. So Robert was a more experienced physio than me, and but I was obviously quite strong technically, and so I would push the discussion of the physics and the real sort of nitty gritty of probe control and getting the optimum picture out, and he would lead on the more clinical relevance and things like that. And so we played off against each other in that way, because I didn't want it to be a one-man. I really didn't want it to be a one-man show,
Right.
and I wanted it what you would now call the point of care element to it to be part of it. So I wanted them to get the radiology style discipline of the scanning, because I think that's critical. But I always wanted them to be thinking as clinicians.
At this time, were you predominantly doing sonography? Because I think you had done some general sonography en route to this, or were you back in the practice of physiotherapy?
No, at this stage I was mostly sonography. So I was doing, I think, I was full-time sonographer for about 2 years after I qualified, because I came out thinking I was just going to go straight back into physio. But then I realized that the education was only a start, and I loved it as well. And so I did a couple more years after I qualified of just full-time ultrasound, just scanning, 100 abdomens and pelvises and nuts and the rest of it a week. And then after a couple of years, I switched to doing 3 days of ultrasound and 2 days of physio, or vice versa. And that varied over the next 5-6 years.
During that time, how much were there an overlay, or were you doing physio and then sonography, or did you do a bit of diagnostic stuff with MSK on your patients?
No, I didn't. At first, I didn't have an ultrasound machine in my physio practice, and the physios were anti it, not quite anti it, but when I got work, they were a bit cautious about the whole. They were still didn't know why I would want to do it, and it wasn't part of their practice. And that went on for a year or so, and then I moved into a more senior role in the physio with one of the big shoulder surgeons locally in his clinic, and then I got to use a little bit of ultrasound there. But then I went and worked. I changed departments to a department where I could do some MSK ultrasound in radiology. So I'd switched things around, but I was still doing a lot of ultrasound and a lot of general ultrasound, and did right up until about 2013, 2014, when I moved almost completely into musculoskeletal.
So at 2013, 14, is that when Chris became part of your evening stuff, or when did you start to mentor these guys?
Oh no, this was back in early 2000s.
Oh, you were working with Chris in when you first started yourself?
No. I was after I qualified. As soon as I was able to, and I felt confident to teach musculoskeletal ultrasound after a couple of years. Then I started running courses,
and that was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we started running courses, I think 2005, and I think Chris probably started probably a couple of years after that, when we started doing the London courses.
So these were structured courses with you said Robert Laus too?
Yes.
And so it was Myers, Laus, yourself, and is that when did Wildman come onto the picture? Was he part of that group too?
No, well, Robert Laus and I did the courses, and Chris was on our first course. He was one of the students on our first course.
Okay.
Along with Robert Mast and David Baker.
Yes.
And some sports medics guys came on as well, and they were, and then it was, Stuart Wildman is one of their students.
They went on as Smug, or they just went on after you? What happened to John Leddy?
Well, because I went and got a job slightly further out of London, and it just became impossible to travel in. So I turned around to Chris and the others and I said, I can't run this from outside of London, and there's no point in running it outside of London. And so then that was, I think, when Chris and Robert Louse essentially took it over.
Yeah.
And ran that. And then the other guys, Rob Mast and David Baker and Stuart Wildman, they wanted to do things their own way, and so they did off and did that.
Right.
Because
Stuart, different vehicles with different transmissions.
Well,
and,
the thing was that obviously Chris and Robert Louse have strong personalities, and Stuart is much more junior in experience than they are, but is very, very bright person who had his own ideas about how to drive it forward, and it was him that drove forward the great websites. They've all gone and done much better websites. He came up with the idea of making a site with lots and lots of material, and I had tried to do that. That may have been how you picked up my name. It would have been on something. I ran a little website on some free downloaded material. I've done it.
It would have been 2008, 2009, 2010 that I was looking around this stuff. I was like I say, I dabbled with it. But I started 2007, but man, I did not. I've got so much respect, and I'm so hungry to get into the discussions that I know you can provide insight on as it relates to some of the foundational stuff. I honestly feel like a poser when I'm talking to you guys, and to be honest, it's wanting to come out from behind the I learned this, but I'm not certain. And I've purchased every textbook and have read some of them. I've purchased most of the video things, and so my education has really been more just me, my kids, and gel with an anatomy book, as well as my own patients that have allowed me to look and then look at the packs for MRIs and stuff like that. But the structure and the history that you have is just amazing. So I guess
it is difficult. It's very difficult to learn ultrasound, but you can. But there's a depth to the knowledge that I always find isn't there quite as much as I would like in everybody who hasn't been radiology trained.
So when you say knowledge, John, are you're speaking of the technology and the image acquisition, or are you speaking of the fact that if we just understood that distal biceps tendon has a component of short head and long head, and we follow that stuff down, because people can get really heavy into that part of it when it comes to anatomy. So when you say knowledge, are you speaking particularly the science of the tool?
A mixture. It's the awareness of all the aspects of what is going on in your picture and why it's going on and why the picture bends the way it does, and how you manipulate the probe, and how what you do, how the depth of the quality of your 3D, your internal 3D map. A lot of it is to do with your eye, what happens in your eye, and Warren Foster, who runs the course at where it is at Bournemouth. I remember him reminding us oldies to be kind to our students, and he said, you got to remember what it was like when you were scanning in obstetrics, scanning fetuses' kidneys, and that day when your tutor points to them on the screen. And I might have told you this before, but your tutor, it's a big screen in a good obstetrics department, and so the kidneys are physically quite large on the screen. The baby's kidneys are large on the screen, and the tutor is pointing at them, and you cannot see them.
Well, you're already talking beyond what my head can get around because you're talking fetus and OB, but I'm with you. You're saying that in front of you is a clear picture of varying grayscales, and his finger is
Yes,
going up to a certain structure and saying, here's the kidney. And you're going, yeah,
because you can't see it. You
yeah,
physically can't see it. And then 2 months later, because of the amount of ultrasound you look at, in the amount of time you spend in a darkened room, your eye picks up more levels of grey,
okay,
and you can see it. And that's true in the eye. But what happens with all the other things, having looked at and studied and scanned abdomen, whatever you're scanning, with quite a lot of feedback that you can get if you want to. If you work in radiology, you have to look for it, but it's there, looking at the CTs and the MRs afterwards, and sometimes in conjunction. You looked at the CT and you're scanning and you start to pick up the subtleties of not just what you're looking at, but what you're looking around and what's going on around it. And you start to move away from that. And I get it with all my students, even the good ones. They're looking at a structure and they ask me to come in for some technical reason. I'll have a look. And I go, well, what about all that, that's going on around it that they haven't picked up on? Because when the way they've been practicing and learning, focusing on their little technical bit, they almost teach themselves not to see all the bits that look difficult to interpret and just optimizing your picture there, which is an important part of it. But there's a whole shed load of stuff going on around there that sometimes it's life and death. I remember walking in once after all the radiologists had gone home and they'd left one of their registrars doing the emergency inpatient list without any supervision. And he's there scanning this poor patient's tummy, looking at all the organs, the liver, the gallbladder, the biliary tree, and the rest of it, and saying they're all normal. And it's like, yes, they are all normal. But this patient has got acres of ischemic bowel, which is a death sentence. It's not picked up. And because he wasn't trained to scan the bowel.
yeah, missing the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that I see. And the defense that the physios use quite reasonably is that they're not looking at that. And they're focusing what they do within their competencies. And what I strive for is that with that technical skill, with the ability to optimize the picture, you can then step out beyond that. But you have to make yourself good at that very, very technical, very, very hands-on thing before you have the capacity.
I want you to tell me the pearl that makes it fast, like weight loss. I want to know this in 2 days, John.
Yeah.
As opposed to years and years and years. And
yes.
and I think that's going to be a challenge. I remember when I first presented this to to an academic faculty of the orthopedic department somewhere, and I came out and I started talking to them and was doing case study after case study after case study. And about 6 case studies in, everyone's eyes glassed over. And I had totally lost them because they didn't understand that the ultrasound did a slice. They didn't understand that it was a tomographic slice. And I said to myself, I have just spent an hour and 20 minutes with you guys, and I didn't even take the time to explain to you what this picture is acquiring. There's such a loss, and I don't know what you're saying is so incredibly relevant to anyone who is wanting to sit in a position of learning. And if we miss that, we're going to totally lose the audience.
And for me, we step over the important bits. Everyone is stepping over what I think is the important part of it, which is why I spend all my time in classes doing tiny details on with the students, and everyone else is doing nice broad strokes and being considered probably more gentle and less picky. But for me, that it's that fine detail of exactly how you scan that makes you fast. You have to be able to get good pictures quickly.
Yeah.
because you have to not be. It's the way I think of it. I have an old 286 processor in here, single core. I really don't want to task on. And I can't think about too many things.
You mean in here, not in
Yes.
your room there. You
No,
had me worried there.
Here.
Okay, I'm with you.
It's an old 286 processor, and you have to. So you have to be the connection has to be perfect. You've got to get good pictures straight away, because if you're fighting to get a good picture, if you're getting suboptimal pictures, you either have to guess or be fooled or make assumptions, or you have to spend a lot of time doing that, and therefore you don't have time to sort things out. One of the things that made me a very good and successful, well-regarded sonographer was that I worked really hard at being technically very strong. And then when I needed time to think, or for something that was more complicated, I could do the easy things very quickly, because my pictures, my imaging was reliable and effective in a very short space of time.
Wow, what you're saying is like, it's elusive to me, because here's what I like to do. I like to blame the fact that person is just not well imageable. They have low water. I like to say that, you're just a bad person to image. And what I'm hearing you say is your ability to refine the image to as optimal as you can get occurs very rapidly, and it's through understanding of what you're looking at and how to make the picture optimized.
Yes.
I don't have any of that, John, and I don't know how, because I want to hear things like, after you place the probe, you need to make sure that your angle of incidence is exactly 90 degrees, and then you want to rock it this way. And I want to know that you have the ability to actually put into words what those years of experience have allowed you to do, so that at a certain time, this thing comes up on my 286 processor that goes, maximum optimal ability is here. And that, the steps that your brain ka-chunks into to make that image optimized, that's invaluable to me. And I've been doing it for years. I hunger for that. Do you believe you have been able to, at times, articulate to your students the process of knowing that image has maximum optimization?
Work in progress.
I want that, man. I'll pay you for that. Big bucks. I'll bring your family to, providing you can somehow hook into the back of my head and I don't have to work to, no, I'm kidding.
Well, this is it. It's I don't know. Nobody talks about slice width.
Say the word.
Slice width.
Work.
Slice width.
I don't even know what that word, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying.
Slice width.
Oh, slice width. And I'm assuming you're talking about how much of the tissue the beam is actually showing, like a credit card thickness, as opposed to, oh, you're spelling it for me. See how you are? You're bringing me into the technical world of, I'm with you.
My kids do Zoom with like 20 classmates.
Oh, wow.
The noise is just incredible. And so they actually want to say anything. They do it.
And so their eyes are actually multitasking, and they're seeing this text, and they're seeing a whole bunch of stuff like that.
I think so, yeah.
John, so this brings us into a content. I've got a half hour more of you. When it comes to this kind of stuff, I don't know, under the category of technical discussion, which I believe is foundational for then you to bring out what needs to be done, or what the actual practical or clinical implementation is of this. I have to understand what that even means. But
Yes.
I will tell you, slice width of the key items under technical, how many bullet points are there in your mind of which slice width is one?
The top.
It's the top.
Yeah.
Is
It's
that
more
what you
important
said?
than anisotropy.
Oh my goodness. Everything is anisotropy. You can't take that from me. That's my maximum. No, is that right?
Well, for me it is.
Yeah, slice width
It's slice width.
is more relevant to the sound application of ultrasound, the correct application of ultrasound than anisotropy. I'm going to listen to you now.
It's more important to you
To
and to
Greg.
me. You're more into because we understand anisotropy. You know,
You and I do.
You've
Yes.
got that, and our students have that. Most of the students that matter, the students that are going on to become the Greg Fritz and the others.
the
ones that are going to practice.
Yes.
And successfully with ultrasound.
Yes.
Are going to know, anisotropy is not a difficult concept. It takes a bit of getting used to.
Yes.
You get caught out at, at least for the first 20 years that you do ultrasound, you'll be caught out by it regularly. But it's a known thing. What people don't understand is the importance of slice width. Have you ever seen Bianchi scan nerves?
No.
On videos?
No.
You've not watched his, he does a good demo from about 2016 that a Dutch group put out. So 1 hour video of him showing the tracks of the nerve in the arm. Very nice video.
I thought I've watched everything Bianchi has done, but I'll look that one up. So it is a nerve tracing of Bianchi for about an hour length on YouTube, you think?
On YouTube, yeah.
Okay, I'll look it up.
I could probably find the link, but I watched it. He didn't show anything terribly new, but it was all good. But the point is, when you watched him scan, when you watch Martinoli scan nerves, they get very pretty pictures of nerves. And part of that's because they do good picture. They have good machines. But part of it is that, knowingly or unknowingly, they're taking into account slice width.
Oh, man, I'm so hungry to learn about slice width. But, John, listen. I need to have you I need to back up, and I'm going to cut this here. We'll get back to slice width because to me, it's the pearl of great price. I've got to learn from your feet on.
Let me tell you one point about it.
Okay.
Well, this is what I tell my students over and over again, is that your spatial resolution. Do you understand what I'm saying about spatial resolution?
I've read that. The density at which we're getting the varying scale colors?
No, the spatial resolution, the resolution of the scanner. So when you think about, you see 2 dots as separate.
Yes.
So what some people think of as the quality of the picture. How that in practice halves when you are 6 degrees out. If you think of your optimum plane, if you imagine a change of 6 degrees, that halves your resolution.
Yes.
And that is because of slice thickness. So you lose just by being a couple of, you think of what 6 degrees is. It's not very much. It's not enough to cause anisotropy.
Yes.
But it halves so from seeing a tiny thing, it's then blurry. And it only requires a very small change in the angle of the probe. And that is because of the slice thickness.
When we were walking up the steps to the Waterloo train station, you were going on about this. And I said to myself, he's already walked me about 20,000 steps more than I normally put in during a given day. And you were going on about this beam width. And I said to myself, this has got to be something of value. It went way over my head. And I want to be better at what you're saying. And I'm hearing you say that this can be learned. It's a skill, but you must have understanding of what you're talking about, or you can never refine it. Whereas these guys, whether knowingly or not, they learned the English or whatever it is. They learned that the angle that they need to be holding this probe, and that has more to do with beam width than it even does with the known ricochet of sound off of a device for anisotropy.
No. They're much, much more important at the fine detail level. At the
Wow.
big gross level, no difference. But when you are looking close, or you're trying to get information close to the maximum resolution of the of your machine, it is absolutely critical.
What about at 5 centimeters?
It doesn't matter what it doesn't matter how far down you go. You still want you're still losing. You aren't going to get anything better in the hit with the tiny changes there, but because the resolution of the pictures is so poor, but you will get better picture, but it won't make as much difference as when you're scanning at 2 centimeters or 3 centimeters or maybe even 4 centimeters, and you're trying to see something small. You're not trying to see something small at depth because you can't. It's there are a lot of other things that affect the resolution at that depth.
I am going to study slice width so that I can make my mentor proud that I at least have some substance when I talk to you again first of next week. Say that again.
You need to know what it is, but the important thing is to know how important it is.
Okay.
Because then you will understand the drills that we make you do.
Yeah.
And the things that
I'm ready for that, John. And I am willing to learn.
Yeah.
I need to now have you spend some time talking about what you did before you were even a physiotherapist, because that's going to segue into the importance of communication. So can you build that story up? Because I can imagine you're on this. Could you just talk? I want to just set it up like this. John was a air traffic controller, I believe, before you became a physiotherapist. Is that correct?
Yep.
And I've been to the track hands. I have seen these guys looking at these screens. I am a pilot, and so I've received clearances, and I've talked to these guys between sectors, and so I know you, and I know how important it is to know what you know. But I want to back up. How long were you that?
Not very long, about 3 years. So
out of London, or where were you?
No, I went and trained, and I wasn't terribly good at it. So I ended up at very small fields, and so working mostly in the training sector with the military, and I realized I was never going to be great at it. So I decided that rather than
there's competency levels in that as it relates to, I would imagine, traffic flow and all that kind of stuff, or
yeah, I'm, as I said, I've got a small processor up here, and
I don't believe that.
Well, no, but it's a certain amount of wisdom even at a young age, and I realized that I have the sort of brain that does air traffic. I've obviously got a good picture brain and can put things away and logical, and I concentrate really well. But what I don't do well, I don't multitask, and that's something they didn't test for because they did all sorts of recruitment tests and psychometric tests and spatial awareness tests, which apparently I flew through. But when I was actually doing the job, I was noticing I wasn't performing as well as the people around me. And
you were putting people in holding patterns because you didn't want them coming in at an angle.
Well, but and the thing you notice is, what are your strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah.
And I'm not good. I can talk well and I can think well. I don't do both at the same time terribly well. And so I figured out that I was never going to be a great air traffic control officer. And so I thought, what else do I want to do? And I thought I wanted to be a pilot. And I'd done quite a lot of flying, and I decided I really didn't want to be an airline pilot. And, some of the more exciting forms of flying were probably not good for your health. Certainly not out in Africa, being some sort of bush pilot. And so I looked around for something else that would interest me, and physiotherapy did. And so I went and did physiotherapy.
The reason why I bring this up, John, because you and I've talked about this, you've alluded to it, and that intrigued me because I have an aviation background privately, is how important it is to get the message across. and how with the fewest words and the clearest of phonetics, a person can understand you. And so there were some issues as it related to even representing findings in reporting that I remember you using that as an example.
Yeah.
And I'm wanting you to expound on that. Is there more than just this hyper and hypoechoic that you have found in the vernacular of ultrasound that could drive you nuts?
It does. I remember one of the best sonographers I knew when I was first qualified would use large words and complex historical words in his reports, because it was the clever thing to do. And for me, that was a complete anathema. Why would you call a bruise an ecchymosis that someone's got to look up? Because they've never learned that.
Why do you even remotely want to be my friend? Because my entire level of credibility comes between learning these words and throwing them out so that people think I know a lot, John.
and it boosts your ego. I remember for years. I remember for years as a physio calling the calf muscles the triceps.
Yes.
Because it felt good to do it. But then you kind of slap yourself around when you start communicating with people, going into radiology, and where it mattering. It doesn't matter if you're writing in your notes, physio notes, that you're treating the triceps. It makes you feel good. But it doesn't matter because nobody else is going to read them in reality. When you get into a position where you have, as in with air traffic, I remember as an air traffic control officer, you had the privileges of your license. They called it privileges. And the privilege, because you have executive authority as a controller. And they said to us, your job is to stop accidents, not to follow the rules. They said the rule book is not there, is there for when you're not there. You are in the wrong if there is an accident. You have failed if there's an accident. So it's not you don't follow the rules.
Yes.
To do your job properly. You do your job properly by stopping an accident.
Yes.
Yeah.
To the extent of what it is required for you to stop an accident, that's your job. The fact that there are rules are only there for structure, but that does not tell you what you have to do.
No, and you have an executive role. You are a professional. And when I look and I think about everyone describing this role, physio as a profession, and you're a professional. When I think about a professional person, it's a person who uses an executive authority, and uses their judgment to make the decisions. And they make their decisions based on their judgment, not on a set of rules, not on a set of protocols. They decide what is needed for the best. And that is and when you treat someone like a professional, you allow them to do that. You say you're living by the rule, you're working within a rule-based structure, but you take the right decision at the right time, and that is your job.
And how that relates to our reporting, you're saying we don't have to use the certain words that might be viewed as orthodox, but we use words that we know are clearer. Is that how it's relating to?
You're choosing what you do, and the report is the sharp end of what you do. That's the bit that goes out. That's the bit that hits the clinician. You need to penetrate to the right point. You have to make your point, and that is the job. The point of a report is to be understood.
And not to buffalo the person reading it so that they have to go get an encyclopedia and say, what in the world are they trying to say here? So if I were to say a hypoechoic mass of heterogeneous nature, with components of intra, you would say there's darkness surrounding the I mean,
I would say what would be understood and what would be by the person reading it or by people reviewing it. So I might say that it's heterogeneous. I would not personally ever say that it was hypoechoic, because they might misunderstand it, mishear it. Someone might mistype it. I sometimes find when I listen back to me, I've said hyperechoic when I meant hypoechoic in the past. And so I just don't say it, because it is a high risk, high error term.
Yes.
And it doesn't achieve what I want it to achieve. So if you're talking about, I would say, a low echogenicity or relatively dark, more often relatively bright. For some reason, I prefer relatively bright as a term. I use that all the time. But relatively dark, I tend to say low echogenicity. I don't know. I think it just flows better. But it doesn't matter. I'm saying it's reduced echogenicity, and that's what I'm trying to communicate. And I'm trying to say that in a way that is unambiguous, if that's what I'm trying to say. But what I'm more likely to say is that this has a cyst with a ganglion-like appearance, or it is a low echogenicity lesion, thin-walled, it has no vascularity. I think this is probably an epidermoid cyst. That would be what I would say in a report, or this is likely to be.
You can't listen to many, at least American-made videos on ultrasound or diagnostic musculoskeletal ultrasound without counting, 2-3 digits, the number of times we'll use hypo, echoic. And I think what I'm hearing you say is it might be likened in the physiotherapy world to abduction, which I don't know that I ever really hear clearly, adduction, ADD, or abduction, ABB. And they're crazy words. We've got to come up with some way of saying abduction. B sounds like D to me, so I think that's what I'm hearing you say.
Has always been. But in physio, nobody dies.
Yes. Well, you're right about that, as opposed to coming up with misidentifying some fluid around some mass or some structure or whatever. Besides the hyper and hypo, are there other things that trouble you in communication about musculoskeletal ultrasound?
It's how much you write. It's how much you say and how much you write. It needs to be brief. It needs to be clear, and it needs to express the degree of certainty of the findings. Because there are no hard and fast rules. There are no absolutes in this world. But so it's in terms of who, and it has to be nurtured towards who's going to hear it. I don't write a lot in a report to a GP, to a general practitioner doctor. They don't want to hear a lot, but I tend to give a little bit more guidance as to whether I think the patient might need surgery, might need referring on somewhere else. If it's going to a surgeon, I might be more interested in telling him what I think the texture of the cuff is, what I think, possibly what shape I think the tear is. All those things are important.
Like a partial thickness articular surface tear as opposed to a full thickness tear, or would you go into the 30% of cross-sectional area has been compromised with a 1 centimeter retraction under the acromion?
I might give some details like that. I tend not to give, I tend to be again, I don't personally, I rarely, if ever, measure anything. I don't really want to put that up as a standard, because I think as a student or as with less experience, measuring is a very useful tool for developing your skills.
With a caliper, measuring the thickness of the plantar fascia or the aponeurosa.
Things like that.
But you don't normally do that. You will say enlarged or thickened, or?
I will normally, I use the Mark 1 eyeball a lot, but...
the who?
The Mark 1 eyeball.
I don't know what that means.
So you just, sorry, I just look at it and I decide how big it
Oh,
is.
oh, I'm with you. Okay. What you're not saying that you guess 0.3 centimeters.
Well, I would know, but then I'm not interested in those sizes.
Yeah.
So I'm not really interested in the thickness of the plantar fascia. Really,
Because
I'm interested in,
based on body weight or based on just the way people are designed, or you're interested in the actual appearance of it.
yeah, it looks abnormal or it doesn't look abnormal. And if it's ambiguous, I'll look at the other side, and I might measure it, but I very rarely put the calipers on something. The finger tendons, I will measure more often than others. Abnormalities in the finger tendons often don't come with a huge amount of edema. They often don't come with a huge amount of change in echotexture. And then changes in size can sometimes be and they're quite subtle sometimes, can be the only thing that makes that gives you that clue as to be able to put your finger on it and say, that is actually a tendinotic tendon, and that fits better, particularly in mild cases of trigger finger and things like that. But outside of that, I very rarely measure anything.
In the back of one of the books, one of the textbooks, I think it's von Holzbeek, his textbook, they have quite a bit of data in the appendix that says average thickness of patellar tendon, quad tendon, all these kind of things. And there's a lot of data, particularly coming out of Japan and there, where they've done, a 3,000 T study to find out what the averages are. That just, and so that the person can put a caliper on it and say it's 30% larger. To you, that's not necessarily relevant in the reporting. More along the lines of, does it look heterogeneous? Does it have indications of interfibrillar fluid or that kind of thing?
Yeah, it just looks abnormal, looks thicker. Tib post is another one where you can get caught out because it can look relatively normal, but it is actually thicker. But you're comparing it to the other side in those cases, because they're certainly in our population. I'm not looking at 21-year-olds. They don't come and see me, or at least very rarely. So in the older population, there are so many changes, so many chronic changes that are not necessarily that relevant clinically. That I'm looking for things that are different, things that look wrong, and the plantar fascia is a classic for that. You get a lot of people with plantar fasciitis, and it measures less than 4 because they're small. And when you look at the other side, it's 2 on the other side, and so this 3.9 one is almost doubled its size.
Yes, and it's just what I'm really getting out of the conversation with you here is that a person can really be following the rules, and they can say that particular plantar aponeurosa or plantar fascia is measured at well below the 0.4 that determines tendinitis or tendinopathy. That would be following the rules in your air traffic control, as opposed to using your brain going to the other side and saying, but the one that doesn't hurt is 0.2. And consequently, we're going to have to get the accident taken care of by saying the problem is still on the side that the person following the orthodox measurements would say that's normal.
Yeah. You're not looking for. It is about having the strength, the ability. You need to upskill to the point where it isn't a big deal to look at the other side, and it won't take you 2-3 minutes to get it. An optimum picture on the other side, a comparable picture on the other side, because
you won't if you know how to do that, and that's part of what I want to ultimately get to. Now, the last time I talked to you, I had about 5 minutes left, and I said, oh, we didn't even get to what we wanted to talk about, but what we did talk about there is important to me, because communication and getting points across when you were a air traffic controller to pilots who needed to hear you in the fewest words and the clearest, so that you could have them turning. knowing that they're going to do that is where I just briefly want to just tease the next subject of our conversation, and that's in probe management. And I know I've made a big thing of it, and I do want to. We'll start the next conversation on slice width, because I want to learn your important things. To me, what drives me nuts is the inability to have a common term for how to manipulate the probe. And it might not be big to anyone else, but I can go off on crazy things. If I am not with my hands on the probe, demonstrating to students what they need to do in order to turn and optimize the long head of the biceps tendon, that it actually turns medial as it goes up and over onto the superior the tubercle. How do I tell them on the right and the left side how they're going to optimize that? The terms rotate, the terms toggle, the terms heel toe, the terms sweep, the terms fan. When I am 8 feet from the person holding the probe, I would like to be able to say, just rotate clockwise, anchoring the heel. And I want them to be able to know it would be like you turn left heading 270 and descend and maintain 4,000 feet. They know exactly how to do that. To me, it matters. And what I would like to have from you, I want to throw out terms, and I'd like to argue a little bit with you as to what needs to be said, because this will ultimately develop into where you're sitting there and I'm on a probe, and you need to tell me what I need to do to optimize the picture on my son's body or on my wife's body. And I want to be able to have an understanding of what you're saying. So you're sitting there going, do I really have to reach through the screen and grab your probe, Fritz?
Yeah. Man, that would be a step forward in technology.
Because to me, what I would love to be able to do is I'd love to be able to hear. I'd love to be able to tell somebody across a busy, a training center, this, and this, and I can watch that come now into where I get a beautiful interval view with the long head of the biceps. How do I have them refine that last little bit where I can see the cartilage and that's what I want to do. And so I want to ultimately be able to talk with you, John, while holding on to a probe of some sort. And I want to be able to say, this means something, this means something, this means, are you with me on that? And I want to have your critical mind as to helping me say, no, heel toe doesn't make sense, or toggle. That's something that I'm eager to get.
We need to figure something out to get there.
And maybe even say, because one of the things that I also know is, how hard do you push? How do you tell somebody, lighten up? Because you're not going to get any Doppler activity if you're pushing that hard. But there has to be terminology that I'm giving to a student so that they'll be able to understand it. And as of yet, I don't believe, at least in the circles of people who will have seen this program, when we get it refined, I would like to be able to have it say, this is how you talk. You and I both know how many ways people call musculoskeletal ultrasound. I've seen high resolution. I've seen diagnostic ultrasound. There's at least 10 different ways to do a Google scan to uncover what it is that we're doing. So I don't know how you and I can hope to do anything more than say, the people who are with us know what we're saying. It'd be really great if we could do it in a way that could have an impact to bring the entire group together and go, when we say blank, it means that. Does that make any sense to you?
Yep, makes good sense. Couple of things. I think it needs to be a 2 or 3 pronged process. So have
Help me
2 or
out.
3 elements, because there are what you're trying to. The classic one is, and I don't know whether you remember the old Calypso song, "The Girl from Ipanema."
I remember the name of it. I can't go down that. Yeah.
Well, that's about a man walking down the street, seeing a pretty girl on the other side of the road.
Yes, and goes,
Yep.
ah.
Yeah, it goes, ah.
Yes, that's right.
When you turn your head to look at someone on the other side of the street, every step you take means you have to turn your head a little bit further.
Okay, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah. So when you are following something like the long-headed biceps, the classic, and I'm afraid when I describe the long-headed my students scanning the long-headed biceps, they come up the long-headed biceps in short axis, and they pass, and they don't scan the long-headed biceps when they're doing it. I teach them to optimize for anisotropy in some vague way that I care relatively less about than perhaps most teachers. But I teach them not to look at the long-headed biceps particularly. What they should be looking at is the bony architecture of the groove, and most importantly, the lesser tuberosity.
I'm with you, buddy.
They're scanning, and you scan up, and you look at the shape of the lesser tuberosity.
Okay, yes, yes.
Go down.
Yes.
And if you think, and the way I think of the lesser tuberosity is the Red Lion pub. You have pubs back there?
But I don't know what the Red Lion pub is.
It's a pub that is it's a name of a pub that is in every town centre in the UK has a Red Lion pub.
Is it a brand or is it just a type of pub?
It's just such a common name for old pubs.
Okay,
Red Lion or King's Head.
All right, all right.
With just so many, every town had. So you get to the way you give instructions to people in England before the arrival of Google Maps was you say turn left at the Red Lion pub.
And does that mean the town center pub?
No, when you're giving directions to anybody.
Yeah. Is it literally called Red Lion, or are you basically saying the middle of the town popular pub?
No, I'm saying that when in England you're giving instructions to somebody going somewhere,
yes,
you tend to say turn right here and turn right there.
Yeah.
And you use the names of the pubs.
Okay, I'm with you.
And that's the tradition. You say you turn left at the Up in Arms, and then you turn right, because there used to be so many pubs.
Okay, I'm with you.
So the great lesser tuberosity is the Red Lion pub, or any other pub that you have.
A landmark.
A landmark, yes.
Okay.
So you go up and you turn left there.
Yes.
So what you're doing is you're recognizing where the biceps starts
yes.
to change direction. Now, as it changes direction, as you make any adjustment, you have to make another adjustment for it. And
that's the head turn to see the beautiful lady you're talking about.
So every time you make a movement,
yes,
an adjustment.
Yes.
And this is a lot of how I teach manipulation of the probe. It's using targets and things, but these are all factors that affect it. And certainly when you're learning the skill, you are breaking it down into you're learning to hold all the factors, all the 6 elements. And if you've flown airplanes, you'll understand even more than sailors do that there are 6 degrees of freedom.
Right.
What you have to do when you're scanning is to constrain 5 of them and adjust a 6th.
Absolutely brilliant, John. Absolutely brilliant. That to me hits home. Yeah. Because to me that's exactly that to me what you've just said. Yaw, pitch, and climb. Yeah. All the rest will vary, but you've got to stay on one the whole way. No, I think that's beautiful. Go ahead.
And then you have to, but when you are moving the probe, it requires any movement with one, adjustment with one.
Yes.
Automatically requires a specific adjustment in another one that you have to understand. So that as you are making your turn, you've come to the Red Lion pub.
Yes.
So you then have to turn left.
Yes.
So you follow the biceps, you turn left, and you have to make you make that adjustment. Then you move up a little bit, but that up a little bit, because you're going from a vertical to a horizontal passage. Every movement up requires a tilt of the probe to keep you in a true short axis. So you are doing your turn, and then you are adjusting, making a move, and then an up, and then a rotation. And we'll get used to those terms. And there are drills I've worked on, and that's what I used to bring the guys on my original courses. That's why they would have to come in at the weekends, because no one would do drills in these. There'd be I had 7 or 8 students on the course, and we'd all be talking about looking at how you scan the medial collateral ligament or the ATFL or things like that, and that's what everyone was interested in the clinical talk and showing them how to do that. I would get the good ones would turn up, because only a few people ever turned up for those sessions when they would come in.
You're talking the ones where you're putting in extra time on, John.
Yeah. I invited everyone, but you'd only get a handful of, there were only 2 or 3 people who ever turned up.
The passionate ones want to be really good, yes.
Chris Myers.
Yes.
Probably turned up. Chris Myers, Lorenzo Maschi, they would come over at the weekend to sit in my front room or wherever it was, or in the department, to do drills.
And it's those drills I want to learn about, John, and you can't tell me. I mean, I want to hope that you have enough that I can play with between the times that we're working on it.
Yeah.
I have questions that are coming to my mind. My biggest question is, I'm going to lose you as a participant if your wife it kills you. And so I'm going to let you go here, and let's connect again first of next week, because I've got so many things that this has opened up. And I would find myself verbalizing it now. I just need to let you go, John. And we'll start in with me talking to you about slice width, and then maybe talking about the drill, and we'll also talk a little bit about the terminology. But again, I have the beauty of cutting this up and putting it back together. Thank you for your time, John. You have been so generous. That's right. With your brain, and I wish I could feel like I was contributing anything. But
that's good. Can you when you, I don't know, if I was you there, I would be making notes of the things because I would forget them. Making notes of the things that came up.
I rewatched these again, and I'm pulling it out to actually make that. But go ahead.
But just the things that you would have liked to have asked or talked about now, the things that are in your head. If if at any stage you scribble them down and you post them, you put them on doesn't have to send to me, but if you send it to me, that might spring my mind into thinking about how I'm going to respond to that, rather than having to do it completely off the cuff when you raise it.
Let me give you, I will send you via email some bullet points from today's chat within the next 10, 15 minutes.
Just things that you thought of.
Yep.
That we didn't have time to discuss. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Well, we'll see you soon.
All right.
Monday, or is that too soon?
No, Monday's great. Let's expect 12 o'clock Monday if I can.
Yep. I'll check with the wife.
Thanks, John. We'll hear from you.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.